Today, we have another young Indian with us in the Voice of the Young segment. Hello, everyone. Good to be back. Today, we have with us right now Kunal Panda. Let's listen to him. Over to you, Kunal.
Thank you so much. And great to have this talk with you again. And it's a really great opportunity. Um, for starters, I'd like to introduce myself. I finished my bachelor's in economics, so it's been 3 and then 2 years of master's in economics yet again. So among those 5 years, it's been a really great journey from looking at different kinds of policy problems or topics that might interest me along the way. And fun fact, I mean, the thing with economics nowadays is that it's extremely quantitative and it's become really math heavy. Before where I am right now, it was difficult to understand the importance of math. But that's something I'd like to highlight much more. That if you want to pursue STEM or humanities, which have a quantitative background in it, understanding math is really important. I did not understand it that well in high school, but well, it's reaping its benefits. Of course, it's not the end all. It's not the end of all that you can do. But well, yeah. In terms of what I'm doing right now, I'm in research. So within research, you do a lot of things. You have a lot of independence in the kind of topics you want to pursue, especially in economics. Before this, in undergrad, I researched a lot in education policy, especially the Right to Education Act. And given my reservations about quantitative methods and a heavy reliance on the same, I used a lot of mixed methods in my research. And apart from education policy, I worked a lot on international trade and the political economy of trade. And then I thought about doing a master's, not in policy, but in research. So in policy, you have a much more hands-on experience with what I'd like to call praxis. But in research, you end up studying a lot of methods that deal with theorizing and trying to find an empirical footing to whatever it is that you're arguing about. So I ended up doing a master's at Sciences Po Paris. And there, I really was able to understand the market and the industry that we have around us, especially for economists. And now then I shifted my focus towards colonialism and economic history. To be more specific, I wanted to work on institutions in emerging markets and the kind of institutions that have shaped shaped local and central governance of late. So to start with, since my master's program had a 6-month thesis, it's a very short time to really dig deep and really work your way through your thesis. But I thought about looking at economic history and the kind of effects it might have, given India's special place in history of being under a colonial rule for so long. So I argued about the effects of health, modern day health on due to colonial rule. As we all know that India's record in general public health and overall health is not the best. It's not doing great. There's been a lot of discrepancies within the country and across South Asia and Asia in particular. So there's been a lot of debate on the kind of policies that might affect health in the modern day. I thought about bringing it back to basics and looking at how administration might affect health, local or central. Then I thought about maybe looking at colonial rule because we've had such a long history with it. It's surely going to affect institutions in the independent India. So there, I worked out some research on the fact that India was divided into regions which was part of direct British rule and regions which were princely states or kingdoms which had autonomy in their own legislation, in their own agendas. So I try to contrast these two with whatever health outcomes might take place due to these differing policies.
Yeah.
And now
So, what did
I'm
you
going.
find?
Oh,
Did you?
yes. So, yes, of course. So, I found that places which were directly ruled by the British have had better health outcomes, marginal health outcomes, at the public level. So basic measures of BMI, Breuer's index, the health of your blood, for example, your glucose, hemoglobin, things like that. They have a marginal improvement, but I would not discount it too much as due to British rule. There's been a huge discrepancy in the kind of methods I've been using. And since 6 months is not a lot of time to conduct this kind of historical research, understanding potential mechanisms is still lacking. I also found that places which now have a higher
Kunal, just a minute, the princely states were very heterogeneous. I can't imagine that the situation in Jodhpur was like that in Hyderabad.
Yes, of course,
So
of course.
that is a big issue when you talk about the averages of 525, 522 princely states. The variation is so enormous that I don't know how
exactly.
you conclude. I mean, I can think of princely states like Mysore, which probably had a better health, and Travancore, which had probably a better health indicator than the worst
exactly.
parts of British India. So I think we. This is just my thinking, but I just want to hear from you.
Yeah, of course. There's a huge variation, and the thing with historical research like this for India is that data which was managed by British presidencies is slightly easier to acquire and digitize than data for princely states, because the British did have a habit of digitizing, of archiving a lot of data. So it's really easier that way, which means that all kinds of census reports and all kinds of health policies that I've been reading about from the British side, there's a high chance that it could be biased.
Okay.
Because at the time you've had segregation policies and a lot of sequestering policies, which will definitely affect long-run health outcomes. So again, it was really difficult to understand potential mechanisms given the variation that you just mentioned. But yes, when I look at Mysore, Travancore, and Hyderabad in the South has always been an outlier in terms of long-term health outcomes of this kind of research.
Yeah.
So they've always done better. Some part of the story is missing. Like, why is it that the variation is so huge compared to states in the north and the south?
Okay.
So that would be really my focus for the PhD now, to really dig deep into princely states and what kind of policies I can dig up which can explain this kind of variation.
Okay.
And right now,
before I let go of this topic, take a look at Baroda.
Yeah.
Take a look at Baroda. It was a pretty large state, and as far as I know, pretty good ruler towards the end. Did set up a good college, good university, and so on, which certainly were missing completely in Rajasthan, where I'm from. Completely missing. And so I think the variation in the states, princely states, has to be a key factor. But let's proceed. Okay.
Just to close this one, to look at these kind of variations, you'll need to subsample the entire district range, and then look at specific places. So the first chapter that I'm thinking of right now is to look at the South, actually. Is to look at Mysore state versus the Bombay presidency, and to try to look at some causal mechanisms, for example, running an RDD, for example, by geographical boundaries, and to really look at districts which are now in two different states, autonomous in a broader sense and homogenized, and then look at differences like that. So yes, these kind of regional variations by subsampling will be really good. But yeah, in terms of the general trend in economics now is that for this kind of historical research is that in the olden times, a few decades ago, the idea was more on trying to say, okay, long-run health outcomes can be explained by colonial rule. Okay, great, there is a link there. But now the idea is to look at why. Why does it still persist? What are these mechanisms and what are these specific points? So Abhijit Banerjee, Duflo, all these people, they've done a lot of research on land inequality, on local governance and things like that. But now is to really dig deep and look at why these land inequalities were the first thing that comes to mind when it comes to, these differences in local governance and the variation that you just mentioned.
Okay.
So the idea now is to look at persistence channels of persistence.
Okay.
And now I think with the age of causal econometrics and microeconometrics, this kind of work becomes really like greatly facilitated by very nice papers and really nice precedents in the region. So
Okay.
now I think there's a big focus on spatial economics. And since nowadays in economics, you can't publish great empirical papers, especially for developing development economics and all the sort. You can't publish unless you have disaggregated data. Household level data really plays a big key in the kind of research you want to do, and if you want to prove a point, if you want to prove some theory. So now that development economics relies heavily on household level data and micro level data and interventions, the kind of causal analysis, the kind of causal models that have come here in the past 5-6 years, they've been really helpful. It's
Okay.
really difficult because it also spurs up a huge debate. So it's the same thing, say, for example, if I talk about regression discontinuities, which is a new up and coming topic nowadays, which is getting published really well. The debate is about the clustering of standard errors and the kind of subsampling that you can do, because RD often has a very small sample, especially for spatial RDs. So what kind of inference can you draw, and is it true that at the cutoff point, is our households really randomized? Because
Yeah.
if they're not randomized, you can't have a causal effect. So now the debate is towards trying to make it as random as possible. Try to randomly infer a function to try to match nearest neighbors and all that.
Yeah.
It's really good. It's really good nowadays that people are looking at the actual math
Hmm.
of how to do it.
Hmm.
But one thing that I would still be dismayed with is the reception of mixed methods.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that I really like. And for these kind of matters, health, general health, all that, you can do the kind of math that you want. You can write any kind of causal models,
Mm-hmm.
but without looking at interdisciplinary literature in sociology, history, and other kinds of humanities, your project will be incomplete, at
Yeah.
least in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree
So
with you on that.
yeah.
Right.
And in my thesis as well, I did receive a lot of criticism in terms of not just the math, but how I chose to look more towards literature review than the math. Because I argued that the literature for health and for post-colonial outcomes is really incomplete. It's a lot of these papers that are being written in India, a lot of them are from the West, authors, for example. I believe that it's a bit more Eurocentric idea about what colonialism meant and what was the state of India before colonialism happened.
Okay.
It's not just the fact that we had feudal kings. We
Yeah.
had a well-functioning economy. We had a well-functioning culture before the
Yeah.
British came in.
Yeah.
So I think that missing link in literature and in historiography is something that has to be uh, kept into account, because well, publishing numbers in econometrics is it's not just economics. It's the narrative that you build around your numbers, which is actual economics. So to look at historiography, the way you write it, the way you write these kind of historical accounts is as much important as publishing numbers, and to look at household level data. And when I look at research at Sciences Po and my advisors, I think there's a great reception to this kind of thinking.
Okay.
Not per se mixed methods, but in terms of literature review and closing the gap. So there is a focus on mechanisms, yes, but the way you write it, the way you approach a specific paper, a specific literature, a piece of literature, and the way you critique it, not just with numbers, but with your own argument as well. So in that way, the reception has been really great. And now, like in economics, you do have the gender parity problem. I still don't see a lot of women. I still don't see a lot of people of color. I don't see a lot of queer people in departments a lot. So that's something that is still a lot of ground to cover. But I was happy that the recent Nobel was given to Professor Claudia. She's done great work, and it's lovely that the Nobel Prize Committee really understood the kind of contributions she's put through. I just hope that in the coming years, recent new faculties really take into account the parity issue.
Okay.
That's one thing. Yeah.
Could I just add one data to it? I'm not talking about overall, but I kept track of all the young people I have done Vidpeds with,
Yeah.
male versus female, and it is 60-40 in favor of males.
Yeah.
Not 70-30, it's not 80-20, it's 60-40. And
Yeah, the gap is closing, but it's not there
I'm
yet.
not making any efforts one way or the other, but I do keep track of this. I don't keep track of
Yeah.
too many things, but it is actually not even 60-40, it is 58-42.
Okay, okay.
So it's
That
not
is great to see. Yeah.
the
It's
58, but it's not due to me. Okay.
yeah.
I'm just reflecting those who come here. I
Yeah.
don't chase, I don't hunt any particular type. I don't have any programs or schemes. I just take it as to whoever is eligible, let's do it. And
Yeah.
so it is 58-42 in favor of young men rather than women, but it's not terrible. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So
It's not terrible at all. So the future is, and in many of the panel discussions which I've had, it's like 5-3 to 2, or sometimes it's all. And by the way, in the Indian Economic Service,
Mhm.
one of the students I interviewed is in the Indian Economic Service, and I asked her what's the ratio, and she said, "Well, it's 80-20 in favor of women."
Oh, okay, that's great. Yeah.
No, it's not great. It's a reflection of many things. So we
Yeah, of
shouldn't
course. Yeah.
just say something is great. I think it is. I mean, I don't want to go into those things because I don't have any, as you would say, data to back it up. But it's not a matter of something. It is simply reflecting that we produce many more women at the master's level in economics, and many of them choose for a variety of reasons to do the Indian Economic Service rather than the general UPSC.
Yeah.
Okay, they don't want to go into the general UPSC. They are very clear they want to be in the Indian Economic Service. So I was surprised. She said, "Sir, there's no discussion here. It's 80% women in the Indian Economic Service." So
Yeah.
by looking at that, one shouldn't conclude anything except that due to certain factors, which I can't say what they are, we see this outcome, but we do see it. It's no longer the case that the pool of eligible people is not, women are not in the pool, they are in the pool. Why is
Yeah.
this ratio like this? That's
Yeah. Yeah.
so I think
Yeah.
it's more optimistic in India at the master's level. You certainly see, I certainly see many women, and I certainly see them as sharp as the men.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So good.
I
Okay,
mean,
let's
yeah.
continue.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, now that we've moved on to India, this is a great point because, well, yeah, it's lovely that there's been some great development, and I agree. For the Indian case, I've personally noticed, in especially in my bachelor's at the college, there was a great deal of gender parity, and it was a really now that I think about it, it was a really good thing to see.
Yeah.
But in terms of long-term positions in research overall, I believe that the gender parity issue is still favoring women. There's still a problem in terms of tenure track faculty and in terms of becoming a full professor.
Yeah.
There is still a gap to be caught up to. And in terms of research or faculty positions in India, there is a problem of having a huge reliance on temporary contracts.
Yes.
So there's a lot of PhD students, for example, who remain as ad hoc professors for years
Yes.
and years and years, and
Yes.
they don't receive tenure.
Yes.
And at the same time, there is no performance appraisal on existing faculty based on the kind of research that they, if applicable, if they've been doing it apart from teaching. So
Yeah.
there is no disclosure mechanism to really understand what the faculty is doing. And that is why, that is a big reason why economics faculty, apart from DSC or say IGI or say ISI, are not doing super well. There's a gap to be filled. But yes, in terms of those reasons, going back to India seems more of a hurdle for me at this present moment, unless there are things which can really improve on your standing as a professor and a researcher. They're two completely different things in India at this point. A researcher is something else, or a professor is something else. But if you come here to say Sciences Po, if you go to the American job market, these two terms are quite synonymous with each other. There's a great deal of synergy between those two. You do have a light teaching loads. There's more focus on you having research on new publishing papers and doing good projects. But those kind of things, I don't see them really well in India, especially just for universities. I mean, you have the economic service, you have the RBI, you have higher level positions in DSC and in DO as well, who do great research. But again, the kind of mechanism put in place to look at professors and tenure track researchers, it's a gap to be filled in.
Okay.
And since I'm working on India, my plan is really to go back, because
Yeah.
what we argue here, sitting here in Paris, like miles away, is that there's no data. There's this we don't have data for this. We don't have data for that. There is data available. It's just that the way they collect it and the way they're regularized is a problem.
Okay.
So the way the consistency of these data sets, the release of these data sets depends a lot on the kind of rapport you have with data collectors and with your department of stats.
Okay.
So, for example, in my case, it was really easy for me to convince my professors here of my research, because my data at the National Family Health Survey is actually conducted by the DHS.
Yes.
Which is an outsourced American company.
Yeah.
And you have support from, of course, Indian departments here, but it's work with the DHS. You get National Family Health data on the DHS website. So it's a completely different way to do it. And the kind of data disclosure that happens is also quite incomplete. It's opaque. So the idea would be to go back and do this kind of research while you're in India. And if data is unavailable on something, then me as a researcher, it's my onus to build data.
Okay.
Because at least I've been trained at this point to make surveys and really fix the problem. There's no point in coming here and trying to, for the lack of a better word, cry about the lack of data. Okay. There's plenty of things to be done.
Okay, good. So let me ask you, since you're very clear about your future, what are your tips for your juniors?
My juniors, for people who are entering their master's program or they're trying to get in, I would ask them to consider the difference between a policy degree and a research degree. Understand what you want to do in the next 5 years, and then think, do I need a policy degree for this, or do I need strict research, core mathematical research and economics? So that's one thing.
So who offers, can you give the names of institutions that you think differ by this?
I'll say that for Sciences Po, one is the Masters in Economics, which you can call it as an MPhil and MRes if you want to, or an MSc as well. The course that I did, which is very intense, it's mathematical. And then at the same time, you have other courses in parallel, which is policy oriented. We have international economic policy, we have international development. They're very specific, pinpointed courses, but they're not extremely quant heavy. So the focus is more on policy and the kind of mixed methods research, or not just research in general, it's more in praxis. So that's one thing. I think.
What about India? Can you differentiate institutions like that, in your opinion?
No, not really, because let me think about it. I don't think so, because at the same, since research in general, except ISI or IGIDR or DSC, people actually after their masters they end up going to the private sector. You don't have a heavy reliance on people who do research. If they do research, they actually come here. That's a weird thing that I've noticed. Okay. You have great professors in India who are really working. For example, there's JPAL. They do great work. The World Bank always hires short-term consultants on research and everything. But I see it's a very small number of a sizable amount of the industry. You have a lot of people joining the private sector. I don't think there is a great difference between the two. Okay. So, for example, if you go to DSC, you learn everything. It's almost the same syllabus as Sciences Po here. Yeah. But people end up going to the private sector. It's the way they're being taught. The pedagogy is something that could be discussed later on. So yeah, the difference is something I don't see it. If I go on to LSE, I think their MSc program has a research track and has a general track in a loose way. So I think there's one course for 1 year, which is only quantitative economics and research methods, which is the intense part. And I think the 2-year program, the first year you do general things, descriptive stuff, basic mathematics, basic things. And then the second year you do research. Yeah. So there is a big difference. There's a huge difference. Okay. And in terms of job prospects, again, if you do a policy course, you're more oriented towards the private sector. Yeah. And if you're in research, you personally feel that you feel more overqualified for the private sector because you've been trained to be a researcher, an independent researcher who's working on ideas on their own. So you end up working on in academia. So that difference is very important for graduate students or undergraduates who are moving on, who want to do a master's. For PhD, well, I'm just starting, but one thing that I will say is that think about your proposals. So if, say, you want to come to the US for your PhD, it's 5 years. So they teach you for 2 years, and then 3 years you have your research and your independent work. So I don't think in the US, in American programs, you need to mention a very detailed research proposal, a very detailed one. But for Sciences Po, for Europe in general, you don't take courses. It's not compulsory. So you just do a 3-year PhD, and you can extend it by, say, up to 6 years. But in those 3 to 6 years, you only do your research.
Okay.
So if you want to enter into the European market, then think about your proposals way in advance, because the competitiveness is just there. So if I were to give you an example of my department, we only have about 12 to 15 PhD students per year. That's it, out of all international applicants and people in the department who want to apply. And amongst them, up to half receive doctoral funding. The rest have to understand about external funding or grants elsewhere. So it's really competitive like that.
Okay.
And if you don't feel comfortable with the PhD immediately, do a pre-doc. It's a great opportunity to understand what you want to do and what you don't want to do. But yeah.
Okay. All right. It's been a wonderful time listening to you about economics. But I also want to hear from you, your undergraduate days in Delhi. What was it like for you, and what tips do you have for people who are thinking of going to college, and what was it like? I would just want to hear you on that.
I think the 3 years in Delhi University was really shaped my personality and the things I want to do later on. And the thing with me, since I was raised for a bit in Pune, and then I went to Delhi. So the difference here is that in undergraduate courses, a lot of honors programs are usually in the north. And for example, in Pune, you have Symbiosis, which has the MSc honors in economics, I believe, but that's just one of them, and it's not that great. I think there are problems with the syllabus, but yeah, going to DU, you do need to score really well. Luckily, I did, and I'm grateful for that. So the 3 years are really intense, in the sense that I had a lot of fulfillment in my professional life, my personal life, and my academic life. And the coursework is really intense. And I'm grateful for it, because those 3 years as an economics honors student in Delhi, I was able to navigate the first 2 semesters of my master's here. It was really easy for me, because I had completed a lot of that coursework in the college itself. And again, the crowd students of undergraduates pan India in Delhi. So you have a huge set of people from different schools of thought, different cultures, different types of people. It's really great to interact with them, and in this way, it's a double-edged sword. So the environment becomes really competitive. So in my classroom, I had state toppers in the 12th exam. So I was competing with them for 3 years. It was really intense. And at the same time, for people who want to enter the private sector through their campus placements, it gets extremely competitive at the same time. So for undergrad, for high school students entering college, the advice would be to open your eyes and take everything in. Those 3 years are really life-saving, very important. And depending on what you want to do later on, and what you're doing even now. And for people who are thinking about getting into academia, understanding your research interests way ahead of time, it's quite important. It's not that if you choose a specific theme that you want to research on, you have to stick to it, but you can change it later on. But having one idea in your head is really more important, because otherwise you'll be spitballing into a lot of sunk cost. So for undergraduates, again, take the full sense of your professional, academic, and personal lives. You'll receive it anywhere, actually. So after undergraduate, you need to think properly: private sector or academia, one of the two. Because once you enter into either of them, switching is difficult. It's not impossible. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult. So you need to make the right call.
All right. Okay. Anything else you want to add?
No, not really.
Okay.
I think, yeah, I think I've spoken enough. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Great. We'll probably catch up with you 1 year from now to see what your new thoughts are, whether
Yeah,
you're
of course.
enjoying your PhD or not. So let's end this now and say bye to the viewers. I'll be back with another young person or an expert soon. So bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye bye.